Tummy pain in kids can be common and hard to diagnose. It can be serious or self-resolving. So how do parents tell whether they need to see a doctor? Is it urgent? Can it wait till the next convenient opportunity? Stand by, Go Healthy for Good starts right now. Hello and welcome to Go Healthy for Good. All kids get abdominal pain at one time or another, and figuring out what's wrong can be a challenge, not just for parents, but also for doctors. Meet Leah. She was a party girl with, it seemed, the whole world at her feet. But that would all soon change. Watch.
The lifestyle that I was living back in my teens and my early 20s was a very destructive kind of lifestyle for health. And so I lived, for myself and pleasure and parties and a lot of alcohol, a lot of binge drinking. And so that definitely had a toll on my mental health. Definitely didn't help at all. I suffered with severe depression and anxiety from doing that kind of thing. Even though it seems fun at the time, it definitely led my mind into a very dark place. I actually heard of this speaker that was in town at the time, and he was doing talks on improving your life in different areas, physical, financial, all these things. So that sounded very good to me because at the time I was suffering with depression, and so I went to them. Anyway, he introduced the idea of a plant-based diet, and immediately, I was like, I need to change my diet. I need to get this junk out of my diet. So I went vegetarian pretty much overnight and really started incorporating the things that he was sharing, got rid of a lot of refined foods and started eating healthy. And so that's where it all started for me on this journey. But on that journey, I got an autoimmune disease. And it was while I was doing this change in my lifestyle that I was diagnosed with this bowel condition, this ulcerative colitis. I started doing a lot of research and wanting to find out how I can fix this. And I didn't actually want to go to the doctors at that time. I wanted to try and figure it out on my own. And so I went on a water fast, and I traveled over to Costa Rica actually to do this water fast. And it was a very, very, very intense experience. I didn't have any medical supervision by medical doctors. It was during this water fast that I got critically ill with an infection, and that really spiraled my autoimmune disease into a further deep, dark place. I was hospitalized, I was in ICU with this infection, and it ended up nearly taking my life. But I came back from that and survived. It was a miracle. And I was in and out of hospital all of 2014. I was bedridden for about 3 or 4 months. I lost, couldn't walk properly. I lost all muscle tone. I couldn't even, walk up my stairs to my house. I had 4 or 5 blood transfusions in 1 year and 7 iron infusions in just 1 year. So I was constantly in bed sick, and it was really, really, really tough for me at that point because I was still only 24 years old, 25 years old, and to be out of work, out of health, out of, my whole life was turned upside down. I didn't ever think I was going to get better. So it was a really dark point, yeah.
Leah shares the rest of her amazing story later in the show. Colton will take us through some fundamental workout moves, and we'll learn about the many causes of abdominal pain in children. So let's start the ball rolling with the news. In the headlines, nomophobia is a thing. Sport is good for the brain, and binge on screens, binge on food. A new pandemic is affecting young adults aged 18 to 24 years, according to a study out of Arkansas. A survey of over 300 college students found that 90% had moderate to severe nomophobia, which is the fear of having no mobile phone, nomophobia. Prior research has shown that mobile phone use at bedtime is implicated in disrupted sleep and addictive use. More severe nomophobia is related to more maladaptive sleep behaviours such as using a phone during bedtime, long daytime naps, inconsistent wake and bedtimes, and bedtime cognitive rumination. Then there's the problem of reduced motivation from insufficient sleep. So how about making tomorrow the time to catch up with friends, news and social media, and tonight, well, that's for sleeping. Extracurricular sport for 6 to 10-year-old Canadian girls reduces rates of ADHD during adolescence. No advantage, though, was seen for boys in this study. However, the Growing Up in Ireland project found that boys with developmental delay at age 1 were less likely to have behavioural difficulties later on if they engaged in regular sport between the ages of 3 and 5. And an Australian study suggests cognitive advantages later on if preschoolers engage in vigorous activity. So if you have kids, no matter their age or gender, there are significant advantages to be had from physical activity from a fairly young age. Kids who have more screen time are also more likely to develop binge eating disorder, according to a new study. 11,000 US children aged 9 to 10 were asked how much time they spent using media, and parents were later asked about their binge eating behaviours. At the start of the study, binge eating disorder affected 7 kids in 1,000 and had increased by 50% a year later. For each additional hour spent on social media, there was a 60% higher risk of binge eating disorder, and for TV and movies, it was almost 40% higher. The link is not explained in the study, but some reasons could be distracted eating, being exposed to more food ads, or seeing unattainable body ideals leading to negative body image. So encourage your kids to not spend more than 2 hours a day on screens, to take frequent breaks, and to engage in physical activity. I'm Dr. Nerida McKibben, and that's today's health news. Our expert guest is Dr. Steve Adams, paediatric surgeon and father of 5. I asked if abdominal pain is a common problem for children.
So it's a pretty common thing for kids to complain of tummy pain. The exact numbers are hard to say, but people who come to hospital with a problem, it's one of the commonest things that I see.
Wow. Okay. So what might be some of the causes for the pain?
So there's some really common things and there's some serious things, and we probably have to split them that way.
Okay.
So the common stuff is stuff like functional abdominal pain, which I describe as tummy pain that's got no serious underlying cause. And probably half of the children who come to a hospital with tummy pain will have that given to them as a diagnosis and might be called non-specific abdominal pain. And underlying causes for that could be irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, lots of kind of things, even just a simple viral tummy bug that we haven't formally diagnosed.
Yeah, because there's not an easy way to diagnose those often, right?
No, not easy, and indeed probably not relevant because they get better. And that's why we make that distinction between functional and non-functional, is because the functional tummy pains get better by themselves usually.
And then the more serious ones?
So things like appendicitis or urinary infection are very serious causes of tummy pain that we have to look into and treat. Depending on your age, depends on what we think of first. So if you're, a young 11 to 15-year-old, then appendicitis is pretty high on the agenda. Whereas if you're maybe 1 or 2 years old, something like intussusception, which is a telescoping of the small bowel into the large bowel, is a reasonably common problem that is caused from a thickening of the bowel that you get in a viral infection.
That's a good piece of advice for parents. More from Dr. Steve in the next segment.
Hey my friends, I'm Colton, your coach, and today we're talking about the fundamental movements of life. Let's get moving. Now team, to my left, I've got Una. Una here is one of my favorite people in the world. Of course, you're all my favorite. And on my right, my other favorite person in the world, Angelo. Team, we're not gonna have any options because today we're simply talking about what are the fundamental movements that make up our interaction with everyday life. The first one, we know it as a squat or a knee-dominant lower body exercise. So team, we're gonna take those feet shoulder width apart. We're gonna sit back into our hips as we bend those knees and get low. Being mindful to keep those knees behind the toes, so don't let them pass that line as we go down, and then coming right back up by driving through those heels and bringing it up. Now, as you do this at home, if you feel any discomfort or pain, you can always limit that range of motion. So, Ange, maybe we'll take it just 2/3 of the way down and then come right back up. That's it. But if we want to challenge ourselves, we want to see if we can get those thighs parallel to the floor. So this is the first movement that is one of our fundamental movement patterns. So if you can think, guys, about a time in your life, thinking about your day, because pretty much everything we do every day is made up of these movements, one of them or a combination of them. Every day we're squatting all the time, sitting down and standing up. I'm actually doing a modified version of a squat right now, the way I've knelt down on the floor. Now I'm gonna have to get myself back up. The next movement is called a hinge. So a hinge, some people who go to the gym know it as a deadlift. This is our hip dominant lower body exercise. So rather than focusing on the knees, we're focusing on the hips. Guys, we're gonna do this in the form of a good morning. So let's take our hands behind our heads, spread those elbows out as wide as we can to really activate the upper back. The goal in a hinge is to keep from the waist up, tight, straight, and flat as we move from those hips. So driving your hips straight back towards the wall behind you. Soft bend in the knee. Your goal should be to have that knee directly parallel with your ankle. So, if you can turn sideways for me, we're gonna have a look at that hinge. So as she drives her hips back, notice how flat she keeps her back, how lifted her chest long and neutral, and how her knees stay directly over those ankles with that slight bend. And then she drives through the hips to bring it back up. Thank you for holding that. I can see you shaking just a little bit. I appreciate you. So keep moving through that hinge. With deadlifts, it's something we're actually doing every day, all the time. Anything's a little bit lower than upright, we're doing it, right? Like we got some people behind the cameras doing some hard work right now, and that camera's a little bit low, so they can round their back and get a sore back, or they can drive those hips back and hinge to get down. Let's move on to our horizontal push. So this is pushing forward, just pushing forward. So our next movement is horizontal pull, or pulling back, pulling towards yourself. Another basic movement we do every day. Angelo, what's your example on this one?
If you're pulling open it.
If you're pulling open it, cheap, but I'll take it. All right, we'll accept it. That's fair. Una?
I would say taking my mountain bike off the back of the
Oh, taking her mountain bike off the back of her bike rack. That's pretty good. And if you're lifting something heavy like that, what else do you have to have tight and engaged?
Oh, definitely your core.
Your core all the time to protect that back. She's extreme over here, mountain biking. All right, team, next up, vertical push. We're pushing up towards the sky. So what are some times, Una, where we push up?
Putting my surfboard on the top of
Putting her surfboard up on the top rack. We know what she does in her spare time. Ange?
If you're packing away a box into the cupboard.
Putting a box up on the top shelf. That's perfect. And the last move, team, pulling down. Vertical pull or pulling down. So Angelo, what's a time that you pull down towards yourself?
If you're like closing a roller door.
Closing a roller door. Nice, very practical, man. Una?
I'd say if you've got blankets that are really high up the top, pulling them down.
Awesome, so pulling blankets down from a high shelf. That's excellent. Team, these are our 6 movement patterns. Again, team, if you can demonstrate them as we go. Squat. Hinge. Nice. Push forward. Pull back. Push up and pull down. So at home, here's our goal. Number 1, think about everything you do in daily life. See if you can figure out which ones or combinations of these movements you're using. Think about whether or not you're using good technique or doing it in a way that could injure yourself. Now we've talked about how to hinge properly. Think when you pick your kids up, when you pick the trash up, when you pick the laundry up, are you using your legs? Are you using your back? Are you hinging? Are you squatting? Or are you doing something different that's not how our body is designed to move? Then think about practicing these 6 movements. If we practice these 6 fundamental movements, they will be more natural in everyday life, we'll be more likely to use them, and then less likely to injure ourselves. So think about these movement patterns in your everyday life, and then take time to train each of these movements. Practice with something that's gonna resist you. Push against something heavy. We can do this from a gym membership, but we can do this at home as well, using things around the house, kids around the house, whatever you've got available to you. Great work today, my friends. I'm Coach Colton. Remember, more is possible for you. Commit to making small changes in your life, and we'll give you the tools you need to be healthier, happier, and fit for a purpose. Your purpose.
Leah was a party girl. After listening to a motivational speaker, she switched to a whole food, plant-based diet overnight, just in time to discover that she had a serious autoimmune disease called ulcerative colitis. She became seriously ill and at 24 faced her own mortality. Watch.
The last stint of my time in hospital was a 3-week stay where I was the doctors were doing basically everything they could to get my inflammation under control with no change. So I was on the highest level of hydrocortisone. I was being fed through a tube, and nothing was changing basically. I had appointments with a surgeon to get my bowel removed, and also with stoma therapists to get a colectomy bag. So it was quite serious, and yeah, they're like, we don't have any other option because none of the drugs are working. And I was very crushed. I was like, I can't believe this is happening to me. But someone mentioned to me, why don't you get anointed? And I didn't know really what that was, but I was growing to know God at this time. And basically it's just a prayer that you do. And so our pastor came down to the hospital and we had this anointing, and actually says that in the Bible in James chapter 5 that you call the pastors and the elders and they come and do a prayer over you. It's like a surrender basically. So I was like, why not? Because, I've tried everything else. I've gone to all the medications, nothing's working. So this pastor came. I wasn't part of a church at this point in time. And yeah, we did this anointing service, and it was interesting because there was no change in anything. All my blood tests were like through the roof and with inflammation, and the next day there was no change. But on the Sunday, because I got anointed on Friday, the doctor's just like, Leah, I don't know what's going on, but your inflammation has dropped like significantly and you can go home. We can release you from hospital. And they were just amazed by this because there was no answers for it. Like, why did I change? Like, why did this happen? So I was like so excited that I could go home because it was actually just before Christmas. And this was like the turning point in me getting back on track with health.
Getting on track with health and with God. We're talking today about abdominal pain, and a common cause of abdominal discomfort in adults is constipation. So I asked today's guest, Dr. Steve Adams, how parents can tell if constipation may be contributing to their child's discomfort.
I guess the main difference is that a tummy pain from a serious cause tends to be progressive and get worse. If your child complains that they've got a sore tummy, and the pain gets better after a few hours, then it's probably nothing serious and you've got time to wait. And likewise, if their temperature's pretty normal and they're able to eat and drink and go to the toilet, then you're pretty relaxed about it. And that's normal parenting, isn't it? But whenever things are just getting progressively worse and the child's maybe becoming lethargic and tired, isn't really wanting to eat or drink, then I think those are signs that most parents take seriously. And we sometimes struggle to note that in older children who we let look after themselves a bit more. And so we do maybe just have to watch our teenagers, particularly the boys, a little bit more carefully to make sure that if they're complaining of something like that, we actually check in on them, make sure that they're not just trying to be brave.
Ah, right. Whereas in babies, it's pretty apparent.
It is pretty apparent. Babies who stop feeding generally are sick babies. And likewise, toddlers who don't want to play are usually unhappy for a reason. And I think it's always safer to get that checked out with your family doctor or with the emergency department if that's the quicker and better thing for you to do. Constipation is kind of hard to define, but there are some formal definitions, and passing a hard or difficult poo is not normal, particularly if that's less than 3 times a week. But you can't apply that to all children. So a baby who's breastfed may well not poo for 7 days at a time. And as long as they're well and they're feeding well and their tummy's not bloated, that's quite normal for them. So the definitions don't really help us a huge amount. It's more to do with how easy is it for them to poo? Are they struggling? Is there pain whenever they poo? Is there blood whenever they pass a motion? And if any of those things are there, then maybe actually, particularly if it's a recurrent problem, you might need to think about that as a cause of what's going on in their tummy.
So how might you manage that? Let's say it's a school-aged child and not a baby.
Yeah, so a school-aged child who's complaining of pain whenever they're pooing or pain in their tummy and they happen to have quite difficult poos, you might want to see your family doctor to talk about some simple laxatives. You might want to try and increase the fibre in their diet. Something like kiwi fruit added to their diet once a day. It's a really easy way to increase the roughage and the passage of a softer and easier poo for them.
That's easy to say in New Zealand. Kiwi
That's
fruit
right.
in other parts of the world might be hard to find, but yeah, we get the idea of fruit. Some fruit are better than others. Yeah.
But other fruit are particularly unhelpful. So bananas do the opposite. Bananas are very good at constipating children.
Right. And vegetables are pretty good.
Vegetables are great. And anything with kind of a rough coat on it is a really good thing to have.
In the next segment, we'll learn when to worry about tummy pain in kids, so don't go away. Now for your questions. Dorothy called. I'm recovering from COVID, but would love to know how to strengthen my immune system. Great question, Dorothy. I like the acronym New Start. Nutrition. Let's start there. Lots of power-packed green leafy vegetables. For E for exercise, take it slow because you have been quite ill, but build up your exercise tolerance with walking and walk every day. W is for water, not just for drinking it, but how about introducing contrast showers every day? As you have your shower, 2 minutes hot and then cold, 2 minutes hot again. And you can adjust it to warm and then get it down. You'll get used to it. Sunshine is a wonderful source of vitamin D. It's a mood enhancer. It helps you relax and it helps your muscles to recover. T is for temperance, to avoid everything that's bad and use in moderation all of the good things. A is for air. Fresh air is important. Your lungs have just had a big insult. And so avoid busy roads or inner city areas. Just go to a park, be near trees or running water when you exercise. R for rest. I can't stress enough the importance of 2 hours sleep before midnight. Having a day of complete rest every week, taking a holiday when you need to, and then T is trusting in God for healing. Someone else asked, my mother's kidneys are failing. What can we do to help her maintain kidney function and avoid dialysis? Well, this is a great question. This is sort of life and death stuff, isn't it? Well, eating a whole food plant-based diet, I've had people reverse their kidney disease with that. And I think one of the reasons is, one, it's loaded with nutrients, but two, you avoid overloading on protein. Eat everything in moderation. Don't eliminate things. Be sure that she drinks adequate water, though follow the doctor's guidance on that, because sometimes you're restricted when you get to this stage with kidney failure. And avoid all sweetened drinks. Control diabetes if she has diabetes, because that sugar in the bloodstream clogs everything. It clogs the nerves, it clogs the blood vessels, it clogs the kidney. And then high blood pressure. Be sure if she has high blood pressure that she has it well controlled. Hypertension will damage kidneys almost instantly. And of course, obey all those rules of health that we just talked about. Be physically active outdoors in the fresh air. Work up a bit of a sweat, because skin is also an organ of excretion. She can take steam saunas to help with that. Avoid constipation, because the bowel is a major organ of excretion. So you want that to be moving well. And most importantly, prayer and trust in God to work His infinite will in her life. Rosie called and said, I had my gallbladder removed. Now I have problems with diarrhea. What can I do? Well, Rosie, this is quite common because usually bile is made in the liver It's then stored in the gallbladder so that when you have a fatty meal, the gallbladder can sort of empty it all out and the bile is collected in the gut to help digest the fat that just came with that meal. So when the gallbladder is removed, the bile is just constantly spilling from the liver into the bowel 24/7, which triggers a loss of fluid and bile salts into the bowel, which is quite irritating. And we call that bile acid diarrhea. So treatment involves a low-fat diet, and then you can sort of mop up that bile acid with Metamucil or psyllium husk. And perhaps if that doesn't work, you can see your doctor for a prescription for a bile acid binder like cholestyramine. Thanks for those questions. If you have a question, get in touch using the contact details on the screen. Now let's head outdoors for some sun, some fresh air, and we'll see what's on the veggie stand today. Thousands of years ago, these large, starchy, sweet-tasting roots found their way all over the world. They were recognised to be highly nutritious and so became a staple part of the diet for many people groups around the globe because they store well without refrigeration. In fact, they become bitter in the refrigerator. The plants are frost sensitive and instead thrive in moist, temperate climates. These roots come in different colours: yellow, orange, red, brown, purple and beige. And the darker colours are softer and moister. These earthy colours give us a clue as to one important nutrient, and that's beta-carotene. Just 4 ounces of sweet potato or kumara contains the recommended daily allowance of vitamin A, which is a powerful antioxidant that boosts the immune system and slows ageing. They're better than potatoes for glucose control for diabetes, and a great way to eat them is to combine them with carrots and red lentils for a hearty, nutritious winter soup. You can simply cut them into half-inch slices and steam them for about 10 minutes. Bon appetit! Today we're talking with paediatric surgeon Dr. Steve Adams about the causes and cures of abdominal pain in kids. I asked him about something called abdominal migraine.
So there's 2 basic types of irritable bowel. There's constipation predominant irritable bowel and there's diarrheal predominant irritable bowel, and both equally likely to happen. And quite a lot of irritable bowel is not very well understood, particularly in children, and it's probably under-recognized. We spot it really just by talking through what the issues are, trying to find out if there's any other causes, because actually irritable bowel is what we call a diagnosis of exclusion. What that means is we have to make sure that there's nothing else serious going on in order to make sure that we're not missing anything. And so you might need to have some tests done to prove that there's no inflammation, that your tummy's fine. An examination by a doctor might well prove that you've got a nice soft tummy, which is one of the things that doctors find reassuring, and that there's no lumpy bits in your tummy, there's no swellings that we're worried about. And then if the pattern fits, we'd talk about ways of managing it. We said that irritable bowel was a functional pain, and so sometimes simply managing the problems that you get with it, making sure you take painkillers or antispasmodic medications at the right times are a way of helping to avoid the problems you get with it.
So it's more about treating symptoms than anything else,
Exactly.
Not diet.
So diet can help, but it depends on the situation. It depends on the cause. There are things you can do to look into causes, and gastroenterologists will be able to help you with that. But by and large, actually managing the child to make sure that they're a happy, healthy child who's otherwise growing, that's all you need to do. And most of the time, irritable bowel syndrome is kind of self-managing, if you like.
Right. Now, I've heard of the term abdominal migraine. What is that?
So abdominal migraine, it's not super common, but it's whenever you have a migraine problem, which is a headache, that manifests itself as a tummy pain. So normally abdominal migraine has an aura, which is true for normal migraine as well. And an aura is either a sight or a smell or a feeling that comes before the main symptom. If that happens, particularly if there's one-sided head pain that comes before or with the tummy pain, then we think about abdominal migraine as a problem. There are some common causes for it, some common foods that you find that can trigger it, like cheese and chocolate.
So same things that cause the head
That's
migraines
right.
cause abdominal migraines.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just an atypical presentation of a head pain. And we have to remember your brain and your guts are all connected by the nerves. There's loads of nerves in your guts, more than are in your brain, in fact. And so it's not surprising, really, that the nerves can misfire and trigger tummy pain or head pain, and they could be confused.
Fascinating stuff. Now, let's go to the more serious causes of pain. You mentioned appendicitis. What are some of the cardinal signs and symptoms that a parent might look out for if they're thinking, has my child got appendicitis?
So it's important to say that not everyone gets the cardinal signs or symptoms. So it's not something that you're looking for all of the things before you should be worried. But equally, the most common things to happen are that you get tummy pain. It usually starts at your belly button and over about 24 hours moves to the right lower part of your tummy. It's usually a persistent and worsening pain. And it often has episodes where it comes in waves and it's much worse. One of the really helpful questions that we've got whenever a child comes to hospital is, whenever you go over those bumps in the road, did that make the pain worse? And that's a sign of peritonitis, which is the inflammation of the tummy lining. And if you've got that, and you've got a story that sounds like the pain started in the right place and it moved to the right-hand side, and then actually appendicitis is the most likely thing.
Right.
You might feel a bit sick. You might have vomited.
And be off your food.
You'll probably be off your food, and you'll probably won't have done a poo. It's not that common to have normal GI function with appendicitis, but it can come on quickly.
So don't delay. Take your child for care.
I think that's right. So you can go probably for 24 hours before your appendix will actually develop a hole in it, what we call perforated appendicitis. So, any delay there is probably not very good.
No, because that can have some long-term sequelae.
Yeah, it can. It can make you quite sick, and it can make sure you have a long time in hospital needing antibiotics and much more likelihood of having a problem after an operation to remove your appendix.
So you mentioned intussusception, and that was a telescoping of the small into the large bowel. Just tease that out a little bit for us, because that's an age group where parents can be quite worried. Yeah,
and one of the main things that make us think about intussusception is colicky tummy pain. So the screaming tummy pain in anywhere from 3 months to 3 years. That's really common, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is.
you need to then size up, actually, is the child going completely floppy and unhappy after those episodes? Because that's a classic sign for intussusception. The other thing that sometimes happens with intussusception, particularly if it's been there for a while, is you get some mucousy blood in the poos. We call that red currant jelly poo, because it looks a bit like red currant jelly in the nappy. And it happens. In the main, in this age group, it happens because the child's been exposed to some sort of trigger that's made the lining of the bowel become a bit thick. And that's probably a viral infection in most of them, although sometimes it's after an immunization. So if you get that kind of screaming pain in the week or two after an immunization, it's definitely worth thinking about.
And again, you need to seek help.
You do. You need to go to an emergency department, really, for that one. And
what's the treatment for it?
Excuse me. The treatment is, by and large, first of all, confirming the diagnosis. So an X-ray and an ultrasound help with that. And then something called an air enema is the commonest treatment. And that means putting a tube with some gas, usually air, into the bottom, and either using X-rays or another way of monitoring the child to push the telescoping of the bowel back into the right place.
Coming straight ahead, we'll take time out for a story, and after the break, there's more from Leah and a lot more advice from Dr. Adams. There's a beautiful story in 1 Kings 17 of a kind widow and her boy. They were enduring a severe famine, and yet they offered their last meal to Elijah the prophet. In return, their bread and their water were sure for the rest of that very severe drought. However, one day, that boy became ill and subsequently died. absolutely bereft, that mother accused Elijah, the man of God, for bringing this judgment on her for her past sins. Elijah quietly took the boy's body, laid him on his own bed, knelt down and pled with God for the boy's life. God raised that boy from the dead, and the mother's faith in God was restored. Of the 10 resurrections in the Bible, 5 involved children and young people. So when Jesus said, "Let the little ones come to me," he really meant it. And if your child is suffering pain or illness, please know that God loves them deeply, and he has an answer for you and for your child. Dr. Steve Adams is a paediatric surgeon with an interest in urology, so I asked him about urine infection in children.
The risk for getting a urinary infection, being a girl, I'm afraid girls are much more likely, or having a problem with your kidneys before you're born. So an antenatal scan that shows that the kidneys are dilated, most likely cause for that is usually a reflux of the urine back up to the kidneys, and that can leave you prone to getting urinary infections.
So normally the urine has a one-way valve, right? So it can only go down, but for these babies?
Yeah, it can go both directions, and that means that whenever they wee, the urine goes back up to the kidney, and then some of that old urine comes back and sits in the bladder afterwards, and so that's why it can develop infection.
So what do you do with those children?
So by and large, as long as they're not getting urinary infections, they'll grow out of it. And we try and just monitor and make sure things are okay. If it's affecting both sides, or if the child's getting urinary infections, then we might need to do some operative treatment to try and stop the reflux.
And what does that involve?
So quite commonly these days we do an injection operation with a cystoscope. So we pass a camera with the child asleep into the bladder through the urethra, and we inject a bulking agent into the distal ureter, which is the tube that's coming down from the kidney. And that kind of bulks up the bit that's meant to be a one-way valve and allows it to stop the urine going back up quite so often. If that doesn't work, we've got a chance to do it again a couple of times if we really need to, or we can do an operation to re-implant the ureter to put it back into a tunnel inside the bladder. So
you'd usually try the injections a couple of times before you go to
2 or 3
major
times,
surgery.
Absolutely, and we try and avoid the major surgery. Most of the time we're very successful at avoiding the surgery.
Okay. And what about something called Mesenteric Adenitis? Tell us about that.
So again, not an easy diagnosis to come to. A bit like the irritable bowel, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. But Mesenteric Adenitis refers to lymph node swelling inside your tummy.
So like the glands we get around our neck.
Exactly.
Sore throat happens inside our belly.
Exactly. Okay. And you've got this bit of your belly that drains all of the blood supply and gives you blood out to your intestine, and it's full of lymph nodes. And if they get inflamed, it can cause your bowel to have colicky tummy pain. And very hard to differentiate from other causes. An ultrasound might help you see the lymph nodes, or you might have done an operation thinking the child has appendicitis, and you come across these big, bulky lymph nodes, and you go, that was the problem. So I think it's really hard to label someone as having mesenteric adenitis unless you've got one of those things. And that's probably why a lot of children get called non-specific abdominal pain instead. So there's a big crossover there.
Right. So they may have something wrong, you just can't see it.
That's
and
right.
It's not serious enough to need surgery.
Exactly, and it's probably self-limiting.
Now, for some children, they can have a pneumonia that looks like abdominal pain, can't they? Yeah. Why is that?
That's a great question. The nerves in your body are highly complex, and some nerve areas pick up pain and your body interprets it as coming from somewhere else. So the most likely situation to end up in where you've got tummy pain coming from your chest is if the infection's in the very lowest part of your lung, or indeed if you've got infected fluid around your lung called an empyema or an infected effusion, and that causes irritation of the diaphragm, which is the muscle sheet that runs between your tummy and your chest.
So no wonder then that you get pain that appears in your tummy. Do you also
Absolutely.
get pain in your chest at that time or
You
not?
can do, maybe not.
But maybe not.
Yeah,
Okay.
I remember my own daughter had a pneumonia, which caused her to be admitted to hospital under a surgeon who diagnosed her pneumonia.
Oh, surgeons are that clever, hey?
They are.
Wow. So, and she didn't have surgery?
She had her empyema drained.
Ooh, ouch.
Yeah,
okay.
poor thing.
All right. Now, what about ovaries? Because little girls have ovaries,
They
do
do.
they? Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
Happily, they don't cause too much trouble. Very, very young babies might have ovarian cysts. That's not uncommon. And they usually go away because the estrogen that's in your bloodstream that often goes into a baby in that time around when they're born and in your breast milk will pass into the baby and stimulate some of those things. But usually they don't cause pain, they don't cause too much trouble, and they'll go away.
And don't need to stop breastfeeding?
Absolutely not.
So many reasons for abdominal pain in children. Now back to Leah, who was diagnosed with intractable ulcerative colitis in her early 20s, and her only option seemed to be having her entire colon removed and replaced with a stoma bag. Till a friend suggested, why not be anointed and ask God for a miracle? With a growing faith and nothing to lose, she was anointed on Friday, and by Sunday, her inflammatory markers had fallen and she was discharged from hospital in time for Christmas. Watch.
We were praying for direction, and because I came out of hospital, but I was still given a host of drugs to take, and I was going to be on them for the rest of my life, I was told. And I was led to a gastroenterologist down in Sydney. They're like, oh yeah, it's a year waiting list, and so we were like, okay. However, after he heard my story, I was able to see him within 2 weeks. So that was another step forward, and I believe, I was being led in this direction. And so I went to him, and he was a great doctor and helped me tremendously with my autoimmune disease, and able to give me some of these lifestyle remedies as well. There's just not one thing when it comes to your well-being that matters. It's like a whole package deal. It didn't all just come at once. It's been a learning process. I've had to learn these things, knowing that exercise is super important, making that a priority, getting sufficient sunshine, vitamin D, all these things, drinking enough water, and all these things, I have come to know, and it's been amazing for me to put them into practice. I can't pinpoint exactly when all this stuff, but it's just been a learning experience over the years of knowing how my body works and what things are good for my ulcerative colitis. I found with any autoimmune disease or with anything in general, it's not just one thing that helps, it's a number of things. And so while diet is super important, and that's something that I kind of nailed down to a T, if I didn't have the other things that we need for health, like exercise and getting sufficient sleep, and healthy relationships and having trust and I believe having a faith, really helped me overcome this particular disease, because having peace of mind is something that we all need, and it's really hard to find that when you don't have something to put trust in. And so, I had my diet well for a long time there, but all these other things I hadn't been putting into practice, and I found that this was what was gelling my health together, is to put everything in. I just feel overall better, and I wish I would feel like this when I was, younger, but now I'm older. I mean, I think that is such a powerful witness or testimony to the fact that when you do look after yourself, your health can just skyrocket. Most of these things are free. I just, encourage everyone who's out there, start doing it today and make a goal and go for it.
What sound advice? If your child has abdominal pain that lasts for a few hours, gets worse, and is associated with lethargy, loss of appetite, fever, or not going to the toilet, then seek medical help. If your child has chronic abdominal pain but is otherwise healthy and happy, the pain is likely to be functional, and it will resolve with nothing more than symptom relief after 6 to 12 weeks. Remember, children under 3 are at risk of intussusception when the bowel telescopes in on itself, That is an emergency and requires urgent action. It often follows a viral illness or immunisation and presents with screaming colicky tummy pain with or without red currant jelly poos. That's all from me today. Thanks for watching Go Healthy for Good. I'll see you next time.